It's almost unbelievable that Naomi Osaka, the star who stunned the world with 4 Grand Slam titles, multi-million-dollar endorsement deals, and the brilliant glow of a generational icon once curled up in a cold, dark room, her pregnant belly heavy, her hand trembling as she wrote her last will at the age of 25. While the world thought she was
Naomi
solely
Osaka is
focused on
back
her
on
thunderous
tennis court
serves
tonight.
and endless glory on the tennis court, Naomi was quietly preparing for the most devastating scenario, not surviving to hear her baby's first cry, not getting to hold the child she had carried. That image is heartbreaking and unimaginable for a tennis queen once hailed as an unbeatable icon, someone who broke every barrier to become the face of strength, will, and success. Naomi Osaka, who once subdued her most formidable opponents, had to confront a mother's deepest, most primal fear. What pushed a proud champion to a point where she had to write a final message in the darkness? What horrifying secret was hidden behind the journey that transformed Naomi from a global superstar at the peak of her career into a lone warrior, fighting a merciless battle on the edge of life and death to protect her life and that of her unborn child? The answer will not only make you curious, but will also send shivers down your spine at the raw truth of a living legend. The shock of pregnancy rocked the world of tennis. The world once framed Naomi Osaka as an all-around female athlete, young, beautiful, a 4-time Grand Slam champion with multi-million-dollar contracts from luxury brands in a future seemingly destined for glory. But in just a few months, that halo crumbled like a sandcastle. Osaka vanished from major tournaments, avoided the press, and confessed to battling depression and anxiety. People thought she was trying to regain balance to return to the court. Then, instead of the expected comeback, she dropped a real bombshell on the world. Naomi Osaka was pregnant. No one could believe it. On January 11th, 2023, a simple social media post with a sonogram image appeared. It wasn't just a personal announcement, it was an explosion that shook the entire tennis world. A 25-year-old player, who had just signed a series of massive new contracts, suddenly declared she was going to be a mother. Headlines screamed as if it were a scandal, and fan pages were flooded with conflicting comments. Some offered congratulations, while others sarcastically remarked that Osaka had found the perfect excuse to retire from the sport as her career declined. In reality, the shock didn't just stun the public, it ignited a global debate. Does a star at the peak of their career have the right to stop for the sake of motherhood? People forgot that behind the announcement was a fragile Naomi, trembling with a fear she had never faced before. In the moment the world cheered or judged, she whispered to herself, "Can I really get through this journey?" Osaka didn't hide the fact that her pregnancy journey was fraught with danger from the start. She was diagnosed positive for Group B Streptococcus bacteria, a threat that could be fatal to a newborn. In the midst of overwhelming fear, Osaka did something few could imagine. She wrote her will before going into the delivery room. It wasn't a rash act, but the cold calculation of someone who knew her life could end just hours after labor began. All the titles and money would be meaningless if she couldn't walk out of that room. The media wouldn't let up. Paparazzi lenses hunted her every move, scrutinizing every photo of her baby bump. Rumors spread everywhere. Is Osaka retiring? Will she quit tennis to raise a family? Or is this just a temporary break before a comeback? But the truth Naomi kept secret was more brutal than any headline. Her body was turning into a battlefield. Constant nausea, debilitating fatigue, and severe back pain. Each day was unlike the romanticized image of a glowing pregnant angel. They were days of anxious countdowns, with every prenatal checkup feeling like a fateful court session where the doctor could deliver any bad news. The shock was even greater when viewed in the context of her career. Osaka had once made the world bow, defeating Serena Williams at the 2018 US Open in a fiercely debated match. She became an icon of a new generation, of a future no longer dominated by old legends. Yet just 5 years later, Naomi faced the risk of disappearing from tennis, not because of any opponent on the court, but because of the life forming within her body. To many, it was an irony, but for Osaka, it was the cruelest challenge life had ever presented. She began to feel torn between two worlds. On one side, the glory, the massive checks, The promises of a legacy in tennis history, on the other, the role of motherhood, full of danger and uncertainty. Naomi knew that no matter which path she chose, public opinion would judge her. But for the first time in her life, she was forced to put her survival instincts and maternal love above her career. This decision turned her into the focal point of a contemporary tragedy, a global sports star suddenly becoming the main character in a life-or-death battle off the court. The story became even more breathtaking when Osaka shared her mental preparation. Before every Grand Slam final, her hands would tremble so much she couldn't hold a water bottle, and she'd lie awake at night filled with anxiety. But all that pressure was nothing compared to carrying a small life, knowing that one medical mistake could claim both lives. At night, she would lie and stare at the ceiling, asking herself, if I'm not here tomorrow, will my child be safe? It was in that darkness that Naomi wrote her will, an act that was both cold and painful, marking the gravity of the journey she was about to embark on. While fans argued online and news agencies scrambled for headlines, Naomi Osaka quietly prepared for the most brutal chapter of her life. The truth is, the journey to motherhood for her was never an easy choice. It was like an endless final match, with no cheering crowds, no glory, just sweat, tears, and a fragile life. And then, the terrible question echoed in her mind, will I have the strength to return to the court, or is everything over here? The pregnancy, a life or death sentence. If the news of Naomi Osaka's pregnancy stunned the tennis world, what followed was a genuine nightmare. Pregnancy is often painted as a happy journey where a woman is bathed in the gentle glow of motherhood. But for Osaka, it was a series of days lived in fear, where every breath measured survival. In the very first weeks of her prenatal visits, the doctor delivered a result that turned her world upside down. Naomi was positive for Group B, Streptococcus GBS bacteria. For a normal person, this phrase sounds unfamiliar. But for a pregnant woman, it's a looming sentence. GBS can be transmitted to the baby during birth, causing blood infections, pneumonia, and even death. Osaka left the clinic with trembling legs. On one hand was the promise of a new life growing inside her, and on the other, the probability of death that she couldn't shake. So, while the media painted a picture of a happy mother-to-be, behind closed doors, she was quietly writing her will. She listed her loved ones, divided her assets, and imagined a future where her child grew up without a mother. This was no longer simple preparation. It was the only way she could control the fear that was tearing her mind apart. As time went on, Osaka's body changed drastically. Constant nausea, sleepless nights from back pain, and moments of exhaustion so severe she couldn't get up after a walk around the house. Every time she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw the proud face that had once silenced stadiums, but a woman fighting a battle against her own body. As her due date approached, her anxiety swelled like a balloon stretched to its limit, ready to burst. The pressure didn't just come from her health, but from public opinion. Reporters' lenses captured every moment, and articles with headlines about her pregnant body were everywhere. Social media forums were filled with speculation. Osaka will never return. She sacrificed her career for a family. Tennis lost a star, but gained a mom. Reading those words, Naomi felt as if she were on public trial for a crime she never committed. But the truth was, she was also judging herself, each day. Naomi was torn between her desire to return to the court and the worry that her body would never be the same. The strength training that was once easy now felt like torture. She stepped onto the treadmill, only to feel breathless after a few minutes, in her exhaustion. Osaka wondered, if I can't come back, will the world still remember me? Or will everything be swallowed by oblivion? In her 8th month, the doctor warned that her situation was more complex than imagined. The baby had the umbilical cord wrapped around its neck, a potential danger during labor. This news was the final knife that cut deep into Naomi's mind. In the middle of the night, she lay motionless, her hand on her belly, listening to her baby's tiny movements and asking herself, can you breathe? Will you make it out safely? These moments aged her by decades and forced her to accept that this battle was fiercer than any Grand Slam. The The stress even seeped into her dreams. Osaka once dreamed she was back on Arthur Ashe Stadium, but the stands were empty, and no one was cheering. In her hand wasn't a racket, but a medical file, and on the electronic scoreboard appeared the cold words, "Labor in progress, outcome unknown." She woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, realizing her subconscious was also imprisoned by the fear of motherhood. And so, the final months of pregnancy became a brutal race. Naomi went from doctor to doctor, clinging to every shred of hope. But at the same time, she mentally prepared for the worst. In her purse, she always carried a notebook where she wrote messages to her unborn daughter. Each line was both a letter of love and a final farewell. The public never saw those tears on social media. Naomi still posted smiling photos and showed a calm exterior. But in the darkness, the obsession grew as her due date neared. Osaka realized she was no longer just an athlete, no longer just a celebrity. She was a woman fighting death for the life of her child. That is the truth. Naomi Osaka never revealed her pregnancy journey was not a picture of pink, but a labyrinth of blood, tears, and fear. A journey that turned her from a hardcore champion into a warrior within her own body. And it was all just the beginning. Ahead, the delivery room awaited, where 12 brutal hours would decide everything, whether she could make it through to welcome her daughter, or if the tragedy would end right there. The moment of birth, 12 hours of hell. The day of destiny arrived sooner than Naomi Osaka expected. The first contraction appeared in the quiet darkness, like a bell signaling a battle with no retreat. She was rushed to the hospital, the cold fluorescent lights illuminating her pale face, and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor echoed like a drum roll before a final match. But this time, the opponent wasn't on the court but was inside her own body. The first hour passed, and Osaka had only dilated 1 centimeter. The pain came in waves, as sharp as hundreds of knives stabbing her abdomen. The doctor decided to use Pitocin to induce stronger contractions, but instead of working, the drug reacted violently. Naomi began to vomit, her entire body shaking, a cold sweat breaking out as if she had just swum out of an invisible sea of blood. Her eyes were bloodshot, her lips bitten tight until they bled. In that moment, she blurted out, "This is the worst pain of my life." Time passed slowly like a clock hand trapped in an ice cave. 6 hours, then 8 hours. Naomi was so exhausted she no longer felt the pain distinctly, only a state of hovering between consciousness and delirium. On the screen, the baby's heart rate fluctuated abnormally, and the alarm bell sounded like a cruel wake-up call. The doctor urgently checked and found the umbilical cord was tightly wrapped around baby Shay's neck. A single moment's delay, and everything could end in tragedy. Osaka gripped Cordai's hand, her boyfriend, but in her eyes, she no longer saw her partner. Only the specter of death lurking nearby. Every time the doctor shouted, "Push!" Naomi felt like she was being torn to shreds. The screams that erupted weren't from a Grand Slam champion, but from a woman trading her life for her child's chance. The cramped room became a life-and-death arena where every groan was like a final shot. 10 hours passed. Naomi's body was so worn out it felt like all her strength was gone. She couldn't remember how many times she had pushed. She only knew that each attempt felt like her heart was about to stop. In her mind, memories of the court rushed back the moment she raised the US Open trophy. The times the crowds cheered, the tears when she defeated Serena. But all of it faded, leaving only one burning question. Will I get to see my child? At the 12th hour, a shrill cry rang out, a piercing sound. But to Naomi, it was the greatest symphony of her life. Tears streamed down her face, indistinguishable from pain, exhaustion, or happiness. Her daughter, Shay, was placed on her chest, her tiny body still showing traces of the umbilical cord that had just been removed from her neck. Osaka looked at her child, feeling as though the world had both collapsed and been reborn at the same time. But the victory was not without cost. Her body was so damaged that the doctor warned her pelvic floor was severely injured and would take many months to recover. Naomi listened, but her mind was almost numb. She knew this moment had left an invisible scar, not a physical scar, but one in her memory, where every heartbeat would repeat the 12 hours of hell. When the morning light filtered into the hospital room, Naomi had stepped into another world. From a global star, she had become a mother who had just survived a harrowing ordeal. Beside her tiny daughter, she smiled weakly, but in her heart, the question still echoed, can I return to the court, or is everything now in the past? Postpartum depression, rebirth, and the final truth. Shay's cry marked the beginning of a new chapter, but it also opened the door to another storm, the darkness of postpartum depression. In the eyes of the world, Naomi Osaka had just completed a heroic journey, fighting for her daughter's life and her own. But behind the sweet social media photos and the forced smiles while holding her baby were long nights of agonizing, terrifying emptiness. Osaka later confessed that there were days she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her body was ravaged, and her mind was in a void. Instead of joy, she felt like an empty shell, and everything around her was a shade of gray. On nights when Shay cried endlessly, Naomi sat motionless, tears falling uncontrollably. She didn't know if she was crying from pain, exhaustion, or the feeling of failure from thinking she wasn't good enough to be a mother. The media, of course, was relentless. They wanted to see Osaka's comeback, a fairy tale story of a champion returning after giving birth. But the reality was far more brutal. Instead of training, Naomi had to learn how to heal her pelvic floor, which had been completely destroyed. Instead of competing, she had to attend therapy sessions to avoid sinking deeper into the spiral of depression. Step by step, day by day, Osaka realized that to get back on her feet, she didn't just need physical strength, but also a mental fortitude far beyond what tennis had ever demanded. The world outside talked nonstop, but inside her small room, Naomi wrote in a journal. In it, she wrote promises to Shay to protect her, to be a role model for her, and to never give up no matter how dense the darkness became. Those pages became a remedy against negative thoughts, a thin thread that kept her from drifting to the edge of the abyss. Then one day, Osaka decided to go back to the gym, not to compete immediately, but to test herself. Could this body still move as it once did? The first steps on the court were a shock. Her shots were clumsy, her breathing was strained, and her muscles rebelled. But instead of collapsing, Naomi smiled, because after everything, just being on the court, even for a few minutes, was a victory after a journey of blood and tears. Week by week, month by month, Naomi recovered. It wasn't fast and it wasn't perfect, but it was steady, and throughout this process, she began to reveal the truth about her pregnancy and birth journey. In interviews, she didn't hesitate to call the experience traumatic. She admitted to writing her will, to thinking she might not survive. These confessions shocked the world. No longer a distant star, she was a flesh and blood woman who dared to expose her pain. That truth, ironically, brought Osaka a new kind of strength. Instead of avoiding public opinion, she faced it. Instead of hiding, she was open, turning her personal story into a universal message. Motherhood is not a pink fairy tale, but a brutal battle that millions of women endure. And in that telling, Naomi Osaka found a freedom that decades of sports glory could never have given her. When Naomi stepped back onto the court in 2024, the audience didn't just see a player returning after maternity leave. They saw a warrior who had walked through hell, returning with eyes no longer innocent, but burning with fire. Every serve wasn't just a technical skill, but a statement: I survived. I'm reborn, and I will continue to fight. Naomi Osaka's journey through pregnancy, childbirth, and depression, once finally revealed by her, went far beyond a personal story. It became an anthem of resilience, the power of maternal love, and the ability to be reborn from the ashes. The world once knew Osaka as a Grand Slam champion, but only after she walked through this darkness did people truly understand why she deserved to be an icon. Naomi Osaka once wowed the world with her 4 Grand Slam titles, stepping onto the podium of glory at a very young age. But it was when her life took its most fragile turn through pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum depression that she revealed her true strength, stripped of the glitz of fame and the flash of media cameras. What was left was the raw vulnerability of a human being journeying from the depths of fear to a moment of rebirth. This wasn't a pink-hued fairy tale. It was an epic filled with blood, sweat, and tears. From writing a will before giving birth to enduring 12 hours of hell in the delivery room. And then the long nights of depression that seemed to swallow all hope. It all transformed Naomi Osaka into a living testament that motherhood is a battle no less fierce than any championship final. We are not responsible if you misunderstand or misapply this content. Please consider, verify, and receive it with discretion. If you find this good, please like, comment, share, or subscribe to our channel. That is the fire that fuels us to tell more great stories about other tennis superstars.